This is the story of Corny,
O'Donoghue.
the last Irishman in the NFL.
The kick is good.
Episode 2, second quarter. The draft.
It's 28-21. Plenty of time to go in the quarter.
First of all, you got to understand how his journey actually came about. He came to America initially to play small college soccer.
This is Jeff Reinbold, pro football coach and host of the Jeff Reinbold Show.
Not very many people at the games, family and friends, not a lot of pressure. But he was such an outstanding specimen. I mean, he's the tallest kicker ever to play in the National Football League at 6'6". And so he had such a big leg. And now you're talking about a completely different world.
I remember my first night in New York, I was on a student visa, and they give you one night in a hotel in New York to give you an orientation. If you fly over there, you're supposed to go to school and all that, blah, blah. And I've never been in a hotel, man. I'm on about the 6th, 7th floor, and I look out, man, bars in the window. It was too big for me. It was just too big. I was scared. I was like, wow, how am I going to survive here, I had one night, one-way ticket, and probably about $100 in my pocket. That was it. But I had one phone number of a guy that lived up the street from me. Called him, and he was there. So, he was staying at his uncle's place, put me up there, worked for a little bit in New York, and then flew down to Birmingham. And I remember getting off the plane in Birmingham, and it had to be 200 degrees. It's like, how do people play soccer in this place, And I was in Birmingham for a few days. I remember walking around Birmingham, and this is in the 70s, 72. I mean, it was my first interaction with black people. Because back then, the only people who were in Ireland that was probably, were medical students or something. So it was like a total education for me.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
This is Corny's brother, Coley O'Donoghue.
In a way, if you think about it as a young fellow, I mean, he was straight out of school, going into a completely different environment, coming from the safety of our little estate and all his friends, literally 20 friends right outside your front door, to going into a pretty unique environment, which became a high pressurized environment. And to be able to adapt so quickly to that, incredible.
I remember went up to where I went to school, St. Bernard College, and it was a nice little campus. There was dorms there for the athletes. You'd have basketball players, soccer players, baseball players. We all lived together. But you'd have, the black people were on the ground floor and we were on the second floor. And I honestly met some of the greatest people, black people, real people in my life.
When somebody goes out and begins to loot and burn a building down, which endangers the health and safety of everybody, if you let the police knock somebody in the head who was breaking a plate glass window, or who was assaulting a policeman, who was assaulting a person on the street, or throwing a firebomb, I think they'd be getting out mighty light if somebody knocked them in the head.
George Wallace, was the governor back then, and very, anti-black and all that. So they couldn't basically go off to campus. They had to stay on the campus, because it was totally a white town. But, it's all changing, but it was an education.
It's not a matter of race, it's a matter of anarchists, and the government has kowtowed to every anarchist group in the United States, and as a consequence, we don't have any safety in the streets of our large cities, nor right here in Washington, D.C.
I remember the first day we went out to the field, beautiful pitch there, and I remember I'd arrived and we were kind of kicking the ball around, beforehand. It's just like all the guys are getting together, just meeting everybody, There was a lot of guys from New York, guys from New Jersey, guys from, Africa, guys from all of the East Coast. And I remember kicking the ball around, and these guys are coming up and introducing themselves. They said, "Oh yeah, I was all state or all city, all this and all that." I said, "God, I don't even know if I'm gonna make this fucking team." It's got all these awards and all that shit, So I remember when training started, I was a little intimidated, but when I saw, I was so far ahead of them, they were good players, but they were very cocky.
In American sports, generally, you stay in your lane. Whereas Neil would be curious about who's in the championship this year in Gaelic. I mean, we'd have those kind of conversations, or he'd be still following the All First Division of the Premiership. So I think, a bit like Dad, they had this very wide range of interests. So I think he was able to jump out of the lane, and I think he was learning by looking at other sports as well.
If your kid plays a sport, everybody gets a medal. Everybody gets a trophy, a participation trophy. So unless you won in Ireland, you get nothing, So I found that they're taught very well of themselves. Ireland, we're always putting ourselves down a little bit, slag ourselves, But, I spent a lot of time with them when, say, Christmas came or summer came, I'd drive up, they'd put me up for a couple of weeks, I'd find a place to work for the summer, So some great memories and great people. I remember coming back after the first year, I think I had some homesickness, so it was a fight to go back, and I worked it was a jam factory. I worked there, and I was making maybe, what knows the time, £10 a week again. And I said, no, I got an opportunity, so I went back. So once I'm back the second time, I came home this summer. There was no turning back then, My brother Cody was over with me. And he was more of a rugby type player. You didn't want to mess with Cody. I was more kind of finessed, blah, blah, blah. But he could run all day, run. We would knock heads a few times, but the old saying goes, if someone was picking on me or someone was picking on him, we were together, that was the way it was, I always wanted to have him on my team. It was very difficult for us to play, even on the street, against each other. We'd end up in a fight. It would end up in a brawl, no question about it, because we were that competitive, It's just normal older brother, younger brother, but he'd do anything for me.
Neil and I would hook up. I had a few summers in his first, when he came out of school. I think I'd been working in London in 72, and he came over and we had a great bit of crack. So yeah, look, we were thrilled. The whole community was thrilled for him. I was just disappointed that we wouldn't get to see him as often as we wanted to, but enjoyed it and indulged it.
I remember when Corny was coming back down to Alabama with me during the summer, and a buddy who I had, good friend of mine, Tom Gorman, I call him Texas Tom. Anyway, his dad lived in Huntsville, and he needed a 1968 Dodge Challenger driven back, stick shift red, driven back to Alabama. So I remember Coley and myself looking at each other, we'll do it. Driving this Challenger, like a V8 Challenger, like nothing like I was ever seen, and it was like the trip to heaven. It was like, interstate, stopping off places. We finally arrived, and it took us about a week to get back. So we're having so much fun,
I never really saw Neil get angry. I never saw him. I would. Like if I got a good belt off someone, even in my later playing days, not as an adult, different person on the pitch. Could never explain it. Calm as anything off it, but just very determined. But yeah, when it's done, it's done. I could take that. Be pissed off, but I could take it. But Neil, just very even-minded, very even, level-headed.
I met a lot of great people at St. Bernard. Played there for 3 years. I made All-American my second year. And I wasn't on a full scholarship until the second year. And when I made All-American, I had some calls coming from bigger schools like Notre Dame and, a lot of the big schools, North Carolina and that. And I was working on, I had to work to put things together for the first year. Yeah, I was washing trucks. They got pretty cold in Alabama, in the wintertime. And I remember being up washing the trucks and it's freezing cold. And my coach shows up. He says, why am I getting all these calls from coaches, all over the country that you say you're looking for a scholarship? I said, well, probably because I'm up in this truck, wiping all this shit off with acid. My hands have gone. And he says, all right, you got a full scholarship. So that was it. I mean, I was walking there 3 miles there and 3 miles back every day. And but that was what you did. You did survive. But and then after the third year, I think what happened was the price of gas went up.
We have at present an absolute shortage of natural gas. This situation is destined to continue indefinitely. And by indefinitely, I mean not only just the next few years, but as far ahead as we can see.
Everywhere we went, we were going in cars. We drive to Florida, we drive to North Carolina, we drive to wherever. So they had to make a choice whether to cut, the soccer program or the basketball program. Well, the basketball program was, people understood basketball in Alabama more than soccer, even though we're successful. But the guys had been telling me, man, you should try this kicking. He says, you'd be good at it. The only football I'd really seen was on TV. So I worked at it for probably about 6 months, 7 months, every day. If you had time to think about it, you probably would be second thoughts. But what are my options? What's the options? I'm backed in the corner. I mean, I can get a scholarship here, but I can't play soccer. I'd be doing nothing. Or I can go down here and do, play football and try that. So I said, hell, and I'll give it a go, give it a lash. The first football game I actually ever went to was in Birmingham and was Auburn playing Alabama. There's 100,000 people there. The year after that, I played in that game in the same venue.
He had that incredible ability to adapt. Even when the times got rough, when in the kicking, he was able, he would never get on the phone and start moaning or, just get on, I'm just going to do something else. Maybe this is the end of it. And then somebody else would come in and say, yeah, come down and play for us. And he'd be off again and we'd all be off again. It was just like following the circus, But I don't think it was ever on his agenda. And suddenly he heard about this opportunity to try out, and Auburn phoned him and said, come down for a weekend and try the kicking. And Coach Jordan at the time, I think, took him in. And so they did it as a standard test. They put, balls on 25, 35 from different angles and, around the pitch. And I think there was 10 different balls sitting on tees. And if I'm not mistaken, he kicked every one of them. And Jordan was in his office looking down and says, who's this lanky kid, Let's have a bit of him, So they came down and more or less offered him the contract, increased his scholarship, and he moved to Auburn. And he had the last 2 seasons in collegiate playing football instead of soccer. So he had 2 years of soccer, 2 years of football.
Auburn was a huge school, massive. It was a different league than soccer as far as the workouts, stadiums, it was big time. First I went in the weight room with the guys. You had an off-season program, and these guys are pumping like 275, whatever, And I'd never bench pressed in my life. And I go on there, man, I could barely push the bar up. It's just a totally different way, I met some great people there too. I mean, in my room, we had a quad, and it was one guy was professional in the NBA. Actually, I roomed with Chris Everett's brother, Drew Everett. He had a tennis scholarship there. Harvey Glass, world record holder in The 60-yard dash, he had a world record in the relay and the Olympic medal. So I was around these people, you know, who were God-given talent. It's nothing else. You watch them, you're in awe, you know, especially in the pro level.
Donegal, I don't know if you know Donegal, he swam for Ireland in the Olympics. And I've become friends with him through mutual friends. But his job as a professional gambler, I usually every time we meet, he said, "Any good days, Donegal?" And he said, "Oh, disaster." He said, I have lots of friends in America through the poker. And he said, I had this call. He didn't know about Neil. And he says, you've been to America, haven't you? And he said, what do you think about American football? I didn't know where this was going, but I thought it was too soon to put it on the table, you know? And he says, I said, I'm making a terrible mistake. He said, this friend rang me and he said this, Auburn are playing Alabama. And I go, this is going to be really good. I still didn't say anything. And he said he was trying to persuade me to bet on Auburn to win. They hadn't won 2 previous years. He said, Auburn are going to win this year. And go for it. He says, they're hot, you know. No. So this game is about 2 weeks away. He calls him again in a week. He said, you get that on Auburn? The prices actually got improved. And Donegal said, no, I don't bet on things I don't know anything about, you know. It's like I kept chipping away. And 2 days before he got to him, he said, okay. So he did a big bit of research and he didn't like what he was reading. So he said, sure, who the hell am I going to talk to in Ireland? He actually says to me, who the hell am I going to talk to about Auburn and Alabama in Ireland? And I'm sitting opposite him, you know? I mean, what do I know about this? I just still let him go. And I said, who did you bet on? He said, I went for Alabama, or they were a better price. They lost. Auburn won.
How about a way to end the game? They got another big one over their arch rival from Tusco themselves.
And I said, you could have asked me about it. He said, what? And I said, my brother played for Auburn. He was at the game. And he said, if you'd called me, I would have stirred you, at least given you something else to add into the equation. And he's just banging his head on the table. I mean, he had gone in big, like, you know, it's like big money. He said, that was a great lesson for me.
Auburn wins it 48-45.
My name is Ty Gleader. I'm from Galway City in the west of Ireland. And as a rugby player, I was average, but my kicking was above average. Started kicking American footballs in COVID just for a bit of fun, and then that led to things moving pretty fast. I went from not having a clue what I was doing, just kicking the ball for a crack, to all of a sudden, you know, working with an NFL expert. And but that led to me playing in the European League. I just started, so I got fortunate there. Packed my bags, moved to Poland, got a bit of experience there, and then that led to me kind of getting my big shot, which was in the CFL, the Canadian Football League. So it's one level beneath the NFL, and that led to me recognizing, look, I think my journey here is going to come to an end. I had done everything I could, so I was at peace with that idea, and then turning over a new leaf and actually trying to, you know, the path that I had just somewhat created, or at least walked in my shoes, that can be of benefit to hundreds of more Irish lads in the years to come by getting them opportunities and getting them scholarships to play college football. So that is how Leader Kicking was born, and that's what I do today. Kickers have to be extremely mentally strong and mentally prepared. That's really what separates the best.
It's different mentality. Soccer, we're more, you know, we're thinking about over ideas. Football is very set plays. You get maybe 30 plays and you're going to play those and that. My part was very easy. You know, when they screwed up, you went on there and tried to bail them out with 3 points. That's the way I looked at it. I had some good days and I had some not so good days. But as a kicker, it's a fine line. You either make it or miss it. There's no gray area there. You know, I mean, the good days where you make it, the bad days when you miss it. So hopefully you make the big ones and get a chance to come out the next week, because kickers are easy to replace. You know, if you miss a couple, boom, you're gone. I had one coach, you know, he was asking about kickers, and his reply was, kickers like grass, they're everywhere.
There's so many people that can walk out and be in the US, an indoor dome, and bang a 60-yard field goal. There's a lot of people out there can do it. But the ones that get the opportunities and the ones that survive and get a crack at the pro ranks, their mentality and how they prepare themselves to go, and that's not easy. I know so many players that really couldn't flip that switch and couldn't get themselves to that space where they just felt ready and just felt like they could own the moment that was about to occur in front of them. But as I often say to guys I coach, sometimes it can be quite vulnerable, but that's where amazing opportunities can occur, and you must be willing to feel vulnerable, be vulnerable, to then experience that growth. And for any man to be a top level kicker at college or in the pro ranks, mentally you must be very capable and be willing to keep developing and learning that side of the game.
Just a technical point of view, if you go back to the Orban trial and the kick, and of course there's nobody in front of you, so the ball's on the tee, it's a bit like a rugby, and he's taking 5 or 6 steps and he's chipping it over like a good 9-iron shot. It's no pressure, it's a big swing. There's nothing coached about that. It's just complete natural flow. But then, of course, when you say, hang on, the ball is not going to be there when you're started. The ball's going to be in somebody else's hand and it's going to come back and it's going to be put on this, and the defensive team is going to have all their biggest guys and they're going to be jumping on. They're only 10 yards from you. When they're jumping for a block, they're probably jumping to 12 feet or something. I don't know. Their arms are at 12 feet high or something, you know. So, I mean, they called him the sidewinder, which to us was ridiculous because everybody more or less kicked with their toe. Well, you just basically hope for the best. There wasn't any of this standing around and all the fidgety techniques and all the business, you know. So, but not even in Neil's time. But Neil had this lovely fluid, like a golf swing shot, you know. I mean, he was reconstructed. So I think by the time he got to that stage, he had got it. He had nailed that sort of fluidity, even under the pressure.
Once I made that commitment to doing it, the goal was to make the pros. You know, whether that was going to be a second round draft choice or the 10th round, my vision was if I got in there, I believed in my abilities, you know, to get the job done. But it wasn't like today. I'd gone back to Alabama, to St. Bernard for about 6 months to just kick every day, just work at it. And when draft day came, you get a phone call. So I didn't get drafted on the first day, which means it wasn't the first 3 rounds. So you kind of, okay, still got a shot, you know?
And then he got drafted quite high, which was a surprise, you know, very pleasant surprise. But then there was the opportunity to go and play pro ball.
After my first year, I actually got All-American, and that opens doors to you. You're on the radar for maybe the pro teams and that. I got the draft worked out, and I was drafted in the 5th round, Buffalo Bills.
To get picked at all is an incredible feat. And to be a kicker and be picked in the draft is, you know, the way personnel people like to look at kickers and punters is you find them on the street. You know, you work them out, you sign them as free agents. You don't use draft picks that you would normally reserve for quarterbacks and pass rushers and corners and all those other positions on the field. So obviously, you know, people fell in love with the fact that he had such a powerful leg, that he was such a good athlete. Here's a guy that, you know, was an elite athlete in a number of sports.
O.J. Simpson is purely the best offensive running back that I've ever seen. The man has everything. He makes 3 moves before he gets the football down, and he has good power, a good acceleration, changes speed without losing speed. Just an amazing football player. I love to see him reach that 10,000-yard mark.
He was really getting exposure to that sort of real celebrity world of sporting celebs up close and not necessarily comfortable, but he was decent. OJ was decent to him, you know, treated him probably like the rookie kid he was, but he just basically ran the changing room, you know.
When you walk in the locker room and you have all these, you know, players as you've seen on TV playing professional, you know, and they're all studs basically, you know, and you're the kicker, like you're the oddball, you know. That's when you knew you'd arrived. That's when the pressure came, you know. You figured, okay, you'd be kicking at Auburn, you'd be kicking, you know, in the backyard and all that. Now you got to go out there and earn your keep.
that was the days of the juice, right? And they called their offense the electric company because they're going to turn on the juice. And you had not only O.J. Simpson, but you had, great offensive lineman, Reggie McKenzie. Joe DeLamalure was an offensive lineman. They had a tremendous football team. And Joe Ferguson was the quarterback. They were a good football team. The Bills were a Super Bowl contender. And, O.J. rushed for 2,000 yards in a season. But the reality of a kicker's life is different. And when you go from Auburn, Alabama, in the south part of Alabama, and great weather to kick in and great conditions to kick in, and then all of a sudden you're drafted by the Buffalo Bills and you're on the shores of Lake Erie and it's windy and it's cold and it's snowing and all of those things, it's a tough place to kick.
Moving from what he thought was collegiate sport into the professional world, you're just a different mindset completely, And I don't think Neil got there yet in his head. And then as in Buffalo, he'd be sitting under a blanket in snow 2 foot high and come on and do your thing, Tough. So I think he criticizes himself around that issue, but it's understandable, coming from where he was.
The pressure around taking a kick in rugby versus taking a kick in American football, very different. And that's something I had to adjust to. And what I mean by that is in rugby, we take a kick, say we miss. You still have ample opportunity to still influence the game and still leave the pitch with people thinking, yeah, you performed well, because we have so many opportunities in the game to run, to tackle, to pass, to kick in play. Whereas, as I found when I moved to American football, I get a shot, I get a field goal. I might only get 1 or 2 more opportunities in the entire game. So I'm leaving the game only having had 3 opportunities to influence the game. Whereas in rugby, I could have had, as a fly half, you could have 70 plus.
I had a slow start at the Bills. I remember the coaches. Jim Ringo, he was the head coach at Buffalo. And I remember, I think it was before the first game, he's giving his pep talk. There was nobody sitting in the front 3 rows. I said, well, I don't want to be the only one sitting up front, You always sit in the back. So I said, all right, sit in the back. And after about, he gets out the speech and he's talking, it's getting outer and outer, and then chairs starting to fly everywhere, So now I understand why everybody's sitting in the back row. It was totally balls out, knock them down, kick them out, take no prisoners type of thing, And I'm like, whoa, okay. And I remember I missed a kick against somebody up there, and I had the lineman come over and give me shit, them getting my face in it. That never happened to me before.
And so now Neil O'Donoghue comes into the game. O'Donoghue joined the team late in a contract holdout.
So you learn it's a different game. You're playing for your life, you're playing for your money, and they're relying on you to produce.
Got that one. They got that one indeed from 30 yards out.
And actually, I kicked the winning field goal. I think it was against Atlanta that year.
O'Donoghue puts the first points of the game on the board.
And I got let go the next day. Gone.
It didn't work out there, but then he had an opportunity to go to Tampa Bay. And his 2 years in Tampa Bay, I think, brought him back to being a legitimate, NFL kicker.
Next time on Corny, the last Irishman in the NFL.
I can remember Coach Hannafin, he sent one of the guys home with me to put me on suicide watch.
Neil was getting booed. The fans wanted a new kicker.
Watch O'Donoghue. He punched and kicked the ball. He thought he was back in soccer for a minute.
He would take me after a miss, put his arm around me and say, Neil, you're my man. No one ever did that to me before.
If you don't have processes, you don't have ways to rebound, it can be really challenging and you can sink deeper, and sometimes there's no coming back from that.
Corny is produced and edited by Lachlan Hart, with additional recordings by Michael McQuaid of Pro Football Ireland. Like, follow or subscribe to Corny wherever you get your podcasts.